Hey everybody, Bill in Virginia, and I have had some requests on doing tutorials on how I've been making my trees. Again, if you've been watching, I've been doing deciduous trees, which you can see a variety of examples right there, as well as pine trees, a couple of different styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do three separate videos. One covering the deciduous trees, another one covering the twist trees, and I did do a video on that a few weeks back, but honestly since I've been doing more of them, I've got a better technique, and I'm even using static grass on some of those. But for this first video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how I do my furnace filter trees. It's very similar to what a lot of guys have put out already, but I've got a few extras that I do to kind of give them, in my opinion, a little bit better shape on just kind of how I want to do it for overall appearance and still keep the cost down. So that's going to be what I'm going to do for this particular video. And I've got a variety of them in different stages of construction that I will kind of go over in this video step by step on how I do it. And you've been seeing that I've used this product called rustic wire. It is a 20 gauge wire in the core, which you really can't see it. And then it's wrapped in a fibrous material, which makes it approximately 10 gauge thickness overall. Some of it can be a little bit narrower, some of it can be a little bit thicker, just, it's an organic wrap around it, so variable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by showing just how I build up the trunk. Again, this is on a straight pine tree, but the same material is used on the deciduous trees as well as on the twist pines, just doing it a little bit different. So what I start with is I take the wires and a little bit of super glue, and I will take two wires, put them together, use the wide end as the base. I will glue it up and spot glue in a couple of different locations, press it together, and hope your fingers don't get stuck. You could use a clothespin, anything. And then once this is set, I will take the third wire and then put it in the valley between the two and build it up that way. And you can do 4 wires, you could do 5 wires, you could make it really as thick as you want. Main thing is just kind of start with the height you want and then gradually bring it down so that you get the appearance of a trunk that's tapering. It's not perfect because it'll have some little bump outs, but you can kind of fill those in a little bit with glue as you go and make it look a little better. So I'm going to get this one worked up. Over here is one that I've already put together. It's glued up and it already shows the next step, which I will do that here in a second as well, in that I have already used wood glue and I have filled in one of the valleys that you see there. So I've added wood glue and then just woodland scenic turf. Just sprinkle it onto the wood glue. Sometimes several sprinklings because it'll soak through the material, and then just coat it, and once it dries easy or well enough to handle, you flip it, you add more wood glue and go. And I'll show you how to do this. Over here too is a deciduous tree armature that I've been making. This one has, I think, 5 wires in it. Well, actually it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 5 for the main core of the trunk, and then 2 that I added in just to kind of build up in the center. Same process, you build it up, you super glue them together, and then you come back in with the wood glue, fill the spaces, and add the wood or the ground cover. You get a nice, very sturdy tree trunk. It's lightweight. You can do a lot with these, and we'll cover more of that when I get to the deciduous trees. But right now, let's just put this together and let's glue this, and then we can go on to the next step already. It's pretty quick. You can make a tree. Honestly, you can make a tree in a very short amount of time. This part right here is the longest part, doing the gluing. This only takes a few minutes. This takes a couple of hours, hence I do them in batches. But once you get it past this point, really you can build a tree in 20 minutes. So let's go on to the next. So this, it's just easy. It's just taking a little bit of super glue, just getting a good drop on there, taking the armature or the next wire, pressing it in, holding it together for a couple of seconds. Make sure your fingers can come off, and that's it. It's glued. You're good to go. I always kind of come in, and about midpoint I'll add a little bit of glue there, again just to kind of hold it together, and then just kind of work my way up to the top of the tree, add a little bit of more super glue there, and then hold the whole thing together until that glue sets. It really doesn't take too long, unless you do like I do and you put in a little bit too much glue, then it takes just a bit. But we'll come in and look at some more here in just a second. So there we are, just about a minute later, and I have the trunk of a future pine tree. So I'm ready to go on to the next step with that, but I'll use this one here for that piece. Again, this has already been glued. I take wood glue, and I like wood glue because wood glue is thicker. It doesn't run quite as much, and it holds the material in. So I just kind of run it down in the channel in between the pieces. Again, neatness does not count as you're doing this. This is nature. It's going to be messy. You just don't want to do too much glue so that it drips all over the place. Then just take the ground cover and sprinkle it on. Just cover it up, kind of get it on all sides. It does not have to be perfect. And the color of the ground cover, you could use any color you want because you're going to be painting the trunk later. And here's the new one that I just did, glued up. Let's put this on here. But what's nice is that the material here, you can drill into it using a fine drill bit, so that if you're making a deciduous tree, you can actually add branches. And even from a pine tree standpoint, if you want to do it a different way, you can put in here, and you could glue in fern material or anything else that you want, or the dead branches at the bottom, which I'm going to do on some of these later. Yeah, it's quick and easy. There it is. That's done. Just let that dry. And what I will do is occasionally the glue will kind of saturate, and then I'll just kind of come back in and sprinkle a little bit more on it or toss it on. Anything I don't use, I'm going to reuse later. So once the glue has been completed on that last step, you'll end up with things like this. You've got a basic tree trunk from top to bottom. And these I tend to do in batches of anywhere from 10 to 15. So I've got a number of the armatures all set. They're all ready to go. Now what I do is I do something a little bit different. And right here you can see I've got miniature bamboo skewers. And then I got heat shrink. And this is 1/8 inch diameter heat shrink. It reduces by about 50%. So what I do with these to give me a little bit more height and, again, a proper taper, because, when you're putting vegetation on and it stops like right there, it just doesn't look right. So what I do is I go to this next step where I take and I put on that little piece of heat shrink, and I cut them into about 1-inch sections. I slide it on about halfway. And then I take a bamboo skewer. I can cut it whatever length I want, long or short. And I put it in, but I put on a good-sized dab of super glue so that it holds the bamboo skewer in place. I've got the heat shrink on it. Then we will come in with a soldering iron, and I'll show you the next step on this. All right, my soldering iron is ready. Just before I work on this, I got the heat shrink. I got a 100-foot roll of it for about $10. 1/8 inch size. This is like hundreds and hundreds of trees. I should never run out of this. So it's a cheap investment, but it's really simple. And you do want to use an electric soldering iron rather than flame because you're working with flammable material. But then it's just easy. You don't necessarily use the point as such, but just kind of gently rub it on. That heat shrink will kind of settle in. It will form fit on the pine tree top. You know, you'll get kind of the squiggles and some other things. It'll form around that bamboo stick as well, and you'll see it'll get a little flexible. And then you just kind of make sure that it's where you want it so that it's kind of pointing up, because the heat shrink will then set and it will become stiff. And then you just turn off your soldering iron and go to the next step. So now that I've got the heat shrink taken care of, and I've got a nice pine tree that has a more gradual taper, to kind of blend this in, even though it's going to be painted, you know, I want to give it a little bit more texture to kind of match the rest of the trunk. That's an easy part. So what I do is I take just a little dab of glue, put it on a paper towel or something else. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference what you put it on, just so that you got it, and that's way too much. Like I said, I do these in batches of like 10, and I can do it. And then just kind of put it on and just saturate this part. And you want to get it down a little bit so that you're covering all the heat shrink too. Next part's super easy. Put it into your ground cover, roll it around, press it in, shake it off, and it has pretty much blended it in so that you've got texture all along it. And what little doesn't get covered is going to be covered in spray paint at a later step. So got that, and then over here you can see how a couple of them look that are dry, and those are ready for foliage to go on. So what I do for that is I take the furnace filter material, and you get it and you cut it into different size squares, you know, however for the size that you want. I will show you what I do on these then here next. So over here I do have a garbage bag set up so that I can cut stuff. But what I'll do is I'll cut the furnace filters into manageable sizes, and then what I like to do is I just peel them. You know, I will get them as thin as I can. They don't have to come out and be done as perfect squares. So this is pretty good. There's a layer right there. So this is a layer of tree branches. And I can usually get anywhere from 3 to maybe 4 out of one of these. And there we go. There's another size. Then what I do is I take what I've gotten out and I will go over the garbage can and I will sort of round it up a little bit, get it to sort of a pine tree type shape. Then I come in and I notch it just randomly. I don't go very deep. I just do it enough to kind of get rid of that square or roundish shape so that it looks more natural, that I've got branches and areas on it that are not like just pure round. So like right there is good enough for right now. You can see that it is no longer round, but it looks a little bit like it has branches. And I'll do that for all of the sizes. You know, I will have anywhere from this size for near the base, this size as I get towards the middle of the tree, and then I will have you know, material that will come out of a block this size or smaller as I get up near the top. But I'll make a bunch of these and then I sort them out by size, and I'll show you what I end up with before I start putting the tree together. From that shaped material, I should have more than enough to come in and do one of these pine trees. And I'll probably do this one. So this one is about a foot-long pine tree, and the assembly is really straightforward, especially when you've got the pointed bamboo skewer on top. It's coming in, taking the largest ones first, running them down to about where you want to establish your first layer, And then from there go, quarter, half inch, whatever your spacing is that suits your eye. And then go from larger on up to smaller pieces. Looks pretty good when we're done. I'll show you how the assembly goes here. So straightforward construction on these. Take the largest piece that you want for the base, insert through the bamboo skewer. It will take a little bit. You'll be able to force it down and kind of get it to separate. As you bring it onto the tree, you take it down to where you kind of want it to start, which for me is right about here. Open up your super glue, and throw the bottle away. And then just dab on a little bit of glue so that the fibers grab the trunk. Does not have to be perfect at this point. Everything is going to get painted here after a while. But you'll do that and you'll get your first layer established. Go to the second piece, same thing. Bring it on. It will self-widen as you go and then work it down to where you want it to be. So that's pretty good right there. Again, give it some glue so that it'll grab. Just kind of hold it in place for a minute, just until you're in good shape. Once you get a little farther along in the process, the paint, the hairspray for putting stuff on, all of that's going to grab and stick it in here. So we just keep working our way down the trunk and adding material. Sometimes you'll come back in and want to add a little bit more glue in spots. And that's fine. It's not going to hurt what your final tree is going to look like when you're done. And just kind of bring it in. And I found that by making the furnace filter material as thin as you can do it, it goes on easier, it looks better, and then when you come back in to trim it later for like a final sizing and spacing, it just makes it easy to manipulate, and it looks good too. Because you can kind of see through it. You can kind of, instead of it's blocking all of the light, it lets some of the light pass. And you get down a little farther, and this is where now the material will start to cover the heat shrink. Again, a little bit of glue just to kind of hold it in place, but you can see already it takes the shape. We'll come back in and we will trim this as we get near the end of the build for it. Now you can kind of start sorting through what you want for a taper for material here. And I'm getting close to the top, so I don't need to have all of it. Bring it down. That's pretty good. And put this one on. Okay, there's that. Now we're getting closer to the top. So even if it looks a little bulky at the top, by the time we're done at a little bit later stage of trimming, it's going to look pretty good. And that one probably, we'll go with this one here. So we're almost finished here with this one. Put that up, put this on as a cap. Go through, we've still got a point on the top, and we'll trim all of these down so they look smaller a little bit later. There we go. So it didn't take very long to get to this step in the tree. Again, excluding the trunk, probably 10 minutes to cut the material to rough shape. And then as you saw, it only took, just a couple of minutes to get everything glued on. So right now I've got a pine tree. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a latex glove on, and even though it's late in the evening, I'm going to go out on the back deck and I'm going to spray paint this one. And this one I'm going to spray paint a dark forest green. And I'm going to paint the trunk as well as all of the foliage. The trunk, as I get down here, I'm only going to give it a light coat because I kind of like that particular color. And I might even come back and paint it all green and then come back and give it a shot of camo brown just on the trunk just to kind of highlight it. Again, it doesn't really make any difference how you're doing it. You're doing it to please your eye and what you think looks good. So come back after the tree's painted. All right. About a minute later, and that's all it is. So the tree has been painted. You can see it's still wet. I will let this dry a little bit. But one thing to note is that the heat shrink is basically invisible. You can't tell, unless you really, really look, where the heat shrink starts and leaves off. So the transition between the rustic wire and then the top of the tree using the little piece of bamboo skewer works really well. You get a nice transition. It's smooth. Using the ground cover on it after you kind of coat it with a little bit of glue gives it a little texture. So again, it fools the eye. I did a couple of them early on with the heat shrink where I didn't do that. And if you looked, all of a sudden the trunk becomes smooth in an area where the heat shrink tube is. And you don't want that. So adding that little bit of extra step works really well. So this I'm going to let dry for just a few minutes until I get my little flocking area set up. And then for this one, I'm going to use 2mm static grass. So I'll show you how I do that next. So this next part is easy. Take any decent hairspray, max hold, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take this over by where I've got the garbage and I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to spray it right down the trunk, but just on the underside, and then I'm going to give it a coat of a darker green static grass. So I've got a static grass applicator over here, but I'm not going to use the actual static piece of it. I seen a gentleman's video online here a while ago where he recommended just taking the static grass applicator or a sift or whatever you've got, holding it about 6 inches from where you want the static grass to go, and then just slowly sift it on. And you know what? It works real well. You don't have to actually have contact to make that static cling. It does it naturally. So I'll show you how I do that. I'm going to spray it, come back, and then I'm going to apply. All right, I have applied hairspray to this, and we're just going to bring it up and very, very light and try to stay more towards the outside of the tree trunk. Just lightly put it on. This is just to kind of give the underside a little bit of a coat. You can already see where it's turning it green. So that's really all I need for the underside. So the top side is still dark, but the underside has got a decent texture. Now come back in and take the hairspray and spray it down onto the outer branches, and then I'm going to use a lighter color of static grass, and I'm going to actually mix it with this dark color so I don't waste anything. That'll give me a better texture, and then when I apply, again, I'm going to try to do it to the outside to leave the inner branches kind of the way that they are. So more here in a second. When I do this, I will sometimes give it 3 or 4 or more coats of hairspray and grass, static grass, or you can use Woodland Scenic's ground cover in any color that you want. It gives you all a nice texture on it. So again, hold it about 6 inches, rotate it slowly, kind of keep it away from the trunk because it's less that you have to go back in and clean up. Okay. So there you can already see the texture on this. Then I'm going to give it another shot of hairspray. That'll help set these needles in place, and then I'll give it another light coat of static grass. Then one more coat of needles, and another coat of hairspray, and we're good. All right, we have a layout ready pine tree, almost. One more step in the construction of this, but you can see that the static grass looks pretty good. Since I've been playing with that method, I like that quite a bit. I'm still going to build trees where I'm using the Woodland Scenics turf and ground cover, the fine stuff to build them up. But for these, that static grass application looks good. So next step is to make it look more like a pine tree. I'm going to give it a haircut. So let's go over to the trash area and I'll show you what I do here. So this step is where we give it more of a real shape. So pair of scissors, come in, and just where it looks too round, you just kind of cut it and trim it, shape it a little bit. Get rid of some of the stuff that hangs out. If you've got stuff that's too big, you just cut chunks out. You get it to how you want it. You're not going to hurt the tree any. You're going to actually give it a much better shape, and it's going to look more real. You want to get rid of things like this where it's like totally round. Mother Nature, it's not round like that. You're going to have stuff hanging. You're going to have little pieces. You're going to take some notches out of it. Yeah, you just want to give it a real appearance. Yeah, you can kind of go and, you're not going to overdo it because that's how it is in real life. Yeah, you get up to the top, you want to make it kind of taper a little bit. You can cut off big chunks. You got it. You get up to the top, again, you want to taper it more towards what you've got. Kind of shake off the excess. And there we go. There we go. We've got a pine tree that doesn't look too bad. Yeah, get rid of a little bit of that there. And now I'm going to give it a little bit of a spritz, and I will glue this piece back up with super glue because that one didn't get held on very well. And come back in, give a couple of little snips here and there, give it another coat of hairspray just to lock everything in place. And we've got a tree that's ready for the layout. There we go. There is the tree I was just working on next to the one that I was showing at the start of it video. And that one is layout ready, which means I'm going to put it into storage along with my others because I'm not ready for it yet. But that's for the straight pine. So the next build might be the twist pine again. We'll see here. But anyway, hope this helps some folks out there make some really nice trees for their layouts. These are easy to build. They're inexpensive. You probably average about $1 a tree. By the time you're looking at materials, if you buy a fair amount of material, you can get a lot of trees done in a short amount of time. I've been averaging about 30 a week, just doing a little bit in the evening. So fun little projects. Anyway, if some of you give it a try, let me know how they turn out. I'd be happy to hear from you. So anyway, keep having fun with your layouts. Until next time.